In this episode, we're talking about the openEHR standard and the healthcare platform from Better. I'm really excited about this episode because it represents a new paradigm in digital healthcare where data in standard format and composable user interfaces have strong separation of concerns, and we'll dig into what that means and what the advantages are and how it's going to change digital healthcare over the coming years. Welcome to Leadership in Digital Health. I'm here today with Tomaz Gornik, who is CEO of Better, a digital healthcare company based in Slovenia, and also co-chair of the openEHR International Foundation. Welcome, Tomaz.
Thank you for having me.
I'd like to start by just briefly recapping what openEHR is and why it's so important to digital healthcare in 2023 and beyond.
openEHR is a foundation which has worked in the field of healthcare informatics for over 25 years, and specifically we build specifications for managing healthcare data. As part of these activities, we have a standards technical committee, we have a clinical modeling committee, we have a committee for education, and we have industry partners, which is the part that I manage at the foundation.
I see. So with openEHR being a clinical data model, your organisation, Better, has built a digital healthcare platform with this data model at the core?
Yes. So the way it works is that the foundation produces specifications for APIs and clinical data models, and then clinicians build these models, and we as software engineers use these models to build solutions. So part of all of these solutions is a platform which manages data based on the openEHR format, and this platform is then used in various applications wherever healthcare data is needed.
So data standards and interoperability dominate the conversation at industry shows like HIMSS and elsewhere, and often that conversation immediately turns to FHIR, which of course we see being adopted in many jurisdictions across the world. How would you contrast or compare openEHR and FHIR?
Yeah, first of all, I must say that we need to understand that the two standards are complementary in a way that there's different uses for each one of them. Obviously, data exchange is where FHIR is strongest and what it was intended to do, whereas persisting this data is not a strong suit of FHIR, and this is where openEHR is much more suitable. And there are several reasons for that. One of them is that as the specifications of data models change, it's incredibly hard to keep data in that format for any long period of time. And we can see that the openEHR data models are much more stable than the FHIR ones. And there's several other reasons, but what we see is the combination of data persistence in using openEHR and data exchange for the APIs and interoperability is where FHIR is best. So
it's actually possible to have both openEHR and FHIR within the same platform?
Absolutely. We support FHIR for exchange and openEHR for persistence, and many of our industry partners do the same.
So let's dig into that concept of persistence and why that's important and what that means. When you say that openEHR is better for persistence, what does persistence mean and why is it better?
Yes, so I always go back to an area which all of us in health informatics understand, which is the imaging world, the PACS world. So 30 years ago, PACS systems started using a standard format, thereby decoupling this data, in this case images, from the applications and the devices that produce the images. So this decoupling allowed for a lot of innovation to happen, whereas today you can actually replace a PACS system without touching the images. So the same concept is what we are bringing to the structured clinical data part. And for this to happen, the data must be stored or persisted in a vendor-neutral format. Now, what you also realize is that healthcare data is different than other types of data, for instance, in banking or telecoms or some other field. And the big difference is that in those fields, keeping data for more than 3-4 years is not really important. Whereas in healthcare, you want to keep the data for the lifetime of the patient because something that happened at birth might affect your outcomes for your entire life. So we cannot imagine an application lasting 100 years, which means that we need to have the data separated from the applications. Applications will change. That's where the innovation should happen. But the data should be stable and kept in a lifelong record.
And that is the state of the industry at the moment, isn't it? Where we have so many different varieties of vendor-specific data silos. And I think everyone is highly motivated to actually convert those over to a more standard, more usable, more actionable format. Is that part of what Better is involved with, is in modernising data platforms?
Yes, absolutely. And one interesting thing which is occurring is that the uptake of this approach is actually happening in the most developed markets. So the markets that have digitized years back, the Nordics, Spain, UK. And the reason for that is that they have seen all these problems with data over the years, having kept it in different formats, spending a lot of energy and time putting the data together. And they are looking for a better way to do this. And openEHR is that better way. And in fact, it's probably the only standard that is built specifically for persisting and long-term management of data.
So if we look into the future and think about 2033, and for those organisations that might have adopted a FHIR data storage model now versus openEHR, what's the trajectory? What's the pathway that they might experience had they chosen openEHR?
Well, I would say that at the moment I don't see any large-scale implementations of FHIR for persistence. Again, I'm talking about persistence, and the reason for that is the rapid change of the standard. We're now in version 5 in just probably 4 years. So, and most of the changes are not backward compatible. So it's really, really hard to keep that to keep data in that persistence model. That said, I fully believe that the two standards will come closer and closer together, because we see FHIR adopting some things which were done really well in openEHR, and openEHR adopting some stuff that works in FHIR. And even to the point where we now have the first archetype, which was developed together with the FHIR community. It's the adverse events archetype is basically very similar in both.
So with the Better Studio, you've got your data at rest in the openEHR format, and it can be surfaced in real time through FHIR APIs and as FHIR data models. How do you get high performance out of that translation activity?
Well, this is the core of what we do. So, when you are opening yourself up to a standard data model, you have to compete on other things like performance and tools to make this easier to use. You cannot compete on locking the customer in, which creates, I would say, the right type of competition and the stuff that is really useful to customers instead of this idea of data blocking and locking in. So we have a large engineering team, over 50 developers just on this data platform, and 12 years of experience with some very large systems. Our largest systems manage over 10 million patients in an operational database, not a data warehouse. With 150,000 users on the system. So we've learned as we went along how to make sure that performs.
So in competing on the tooling and the value proposition, rather than having silos of data, you've created a composable user interface layer, which makes it possible to very rapidly develop new apps, new forms, new methods of data capture and display. And one of the things that I was very pleased to see was that out of the box it supports different form factors, smartphones, tablets, bigger screens. Can you tell me a little bit about how quickly initiatives can get underway with that combination of composable UI and a standard data model?
Yeah, so most people understand the concept of low code, which is well adopted in other industries. I would argue that it's not as well adopted in healthcare, especially in the clinical part. There's many low code solutions for the administrative part of healthcare, but the clinical part is much more difficult because of the complexity of data. And what we bring to the table, which is unique, is that instead of building the form and then somehow attaching that to data, we start with the data and use the data models to populate the form. So that gives us several advantages. One of them is that the binding to data is immediate and correct, of course. And the other thing is that the validation that we have defined at the model level is passed on through the UI all the way to the input fields. So this creates, this doesn't allow for any mismatch between the validation, which means it ensures the quality of data. So the data that is entered is actually validated at the point of entry. So this is unique because when we look at the other platforms that have tried going into the clinical side of healthcare for low code, they've not done very much. So this composability is really important, but it's also important that it has a foundation in data. And this is, I think, the value proposition of our tools. So provided you have the data models, you can actually build these forms really quickly. And by building them, I don't mean just us, I mean our customers. So we have, for instance, the Christie in London, the largest cancer trust in Europe, that has built over 30 forms in a couple of months from start to finish for PROMs, patient-reported outcomes. We have the One London project where we've integrated all of London's healthcare and built care plans in a matter of 7 months. So these are timeframes which are very unusual in healthcare. And at the same time, we did not compromise on the quality of data being managed.
Yes, it's an incredibly different pattern of rollout, and it sounds to me like by designing these forms in the composable UI, you get the interoperability baked in. The data's there in an already fully documented industry standard and accessible over standard APIs for other things like automation, AI.
Well, I would even challenge the word interoperability, because what we are trying to do is intraoperability, not interoperability. So interoperability would be between systems, and intraoperability is within a system. So if you think about it, what the ideal world would be that everybody would have data in the same format, even if it's not in the same place, as long as it's in the same format, and then have the ability to put this together easily, provided you have the legal means and use case to do that. And we can see some countries going down that path. Catalonia is the first example, where they see their entire healthcare system in a couple of years having solutions, different solutions, but the same data underpinning.
So it's almost like a single backbone across.
Yes, but again, it doesn't mean it's a single database.
Yep, okay.
A single storage. It means that it's the same format, even if it's stored in different places.
And so then it's much easier to mash together and derive insights and be able to take action.
It becomes a legal issue more than a technical one.
Mm-hmm. Now, most clinicians tend to turn off when it comes to discussions about interoperability and data models. It's important to focus on what's important to those at the coalface of care delivery. What's in it for our busy hospital staff, for example?
So this is the interesting thing. I forgot to mention that openEHR is fundamentally different in how we produce these models, because the models are produced by clinicians. And you would think that's the case with other approaches, but it's not. It's usually the IT people building these data models. Sometimes it's even clinicians coding, and we know that both of these are not ideal. So this separation of clinical data modeling done by clinicians and software development done by software experts makes a lot of sense. So to answer your question, because the models are built in a way that clinicians can understand, easily understand, not needing a tech degree, I think it's much easier for them to accept and understand why they're entering certain data. Now, of course, every time we bring out a solution, we usually add to the burden of clinicians, which, of course, has probably gone too far. So there's other ways of capturing this data with devices, with speech recognition, with things like that. But all of that will have to end up in some type of a structured data format. And actually, we're also working on converting free text into a fully structured and fully structured text-bound to terminologies like SNOMED.
It's interesting you mentioned, doctors learning to code to be able to have an impact. That's actually been the career journey that I've had, and what I see looking forward is that's no longer going to be necessary. Platforms are now emerging that really put the capability of app building and encompassing whatever clinical pathway you want to implement into software that's it's just ready to use.
Yeah, but at the same time, you would want the end user, a clinician or nurse, to have the ability to assemble their application experience.
Yeah.
So an interesting analogy, which I really like, is that is from the music industry. So if you think about it, when I was young, to listen to a song, you had to purchase the whole record. So that's basically the idea of today's monoliths in healthcare EHRs. Then, with some skills, you could create a mixtape from different records and actually listen to what you wanted. But you needed some skills, some technical skills. So this is the best of breed approach of today. You need some integration, but you might be able to put together best of breed. Whereas today, you use Spotify and anybody can select and produce a playlist. And I think this is where we're now trying to go, so that an end user can create an application experience that they need to do their work.
Yep, and once the changes happened, it's almost hard to imagine how it was before. It becomes far more natural. I wanted to ask you about Better's approach to the education system. We've got graduates in healthcare disciplines like nursing and medicine. They go through university and then they hit care delivery in hospital, and they're asked to use these systems, so often for the first time. What does Better do in that space?
Yeah, so next to our platform, we have one application which is called Medication Management, and this one is an end user application. So what we've done is we've created a university program where we now have 6 or 7 universities, including Liverpool, including UCL, including Newcastle, Plymouth, some in Slovenia, hopefully some in Barcelona soon, where we introduce EPMA, Electronic Prescription and Medicines Administration, to 3rd, 4th year students in medicine. And this has worked incredibly well for both sides because they get to know our product, but at the same time, as part of their curriculum, they learn how to prescribe electronically. Your organisation actually started in possibly one of the most challenging aspects of digital healthcare that there is, which is the management of inpatient medications, prescribing and administration. Yeah, it's not that we started there, it's that we saw this. So you have to imagine, go back 8, 9 years, it was only the very early adopters that were thinking platforms. And we had a platform to sell, so it was very hard coming to the NHS. They said, wow, we like the idea, but there's no tenders for platforms, so do you have an application? So we had an application for managing pediatric inpatient care, which is the most difficult type of prescribing. So we adapted that to the UK market with the help of the NHS. And we launched this, and we now have 12 trusts running this. But the interesting thing is that, of course, it's based on the platform. So by purchasing EPMA, they also get the platform, and they can expand to other uses later. So basically, it was a way of getting into accounts at a time where people were not buying platforms. Of course, this has changed significantly, mostly due to COVID. Because what COVID has done, interestingly enough, is made people realize, especially decision makers, that they don't have good data. And it's put a renewed focus on data, which I would say 5 years ago, wasn't there. People were buying applications without thinking about the data. Mm-hmm. Now this has fundamentally changed, and now there is a market for platforms.
Absolutely. You're seeing growing interest and success in many countries around the world. Would you like to talk about the areas of greatest activity?
Yeah. So we're now in 18 markets. And I said before that the interesting thing is it's the most developed markets that are adopting this approach. And I think that it's really nice to see, because these are already digitized institutions. The problem is they were not doing standard data, and they've seen all the problems of not doing that. We're not doing much actually in greenfield situations or where people don't have good IT systems. So this is a surprise to me. I thought it would be the other way around. But it's a testament of how this is fit for purpose, because we're talking to people who really know what they want, having the experience of doing this. So the Nordics, you have to understand that all the vendors in the Nordics use openEHR, all the major ones. You also see this in the NHS. I mentioned Spain, specifically Catalonia, has actually gone out to tender for the entire healthcare system to be based on openEHR, including platforms and applications. We see this in many other countries. The Netherlands, a lot of interest. I don't know if you saw this week, the Minister of Health of the Netherlands stood on stage and said we need to separate data from applications. The Secretary of State, Matt Hancock of the UK, former one, did the same in 2021, right after COVID, separating data from applications. So this is the message that is coming through. Again, it is in the most developed markets.
That fundamental principle being announced by the top level of leadership, it really is a line in the sand, isn't it?
It's game-changing, because the current vendors, the major ones, don't play that game.
Internationalisation is often a challenge for software vendors. Is it for you?
It is, but we made a decision very early on to stick to clinical applications. And I would argue that clinical applications are more similar than administrative ones going across borders. You know, the billing systems are always completely different. The way you handle appointments and patients changes a lot. But clinically, what we see in e-prescribing, yes, of course, the terminologies are different. The drug database is sometimes different, but the procedures and how to do stuff is basically the same. So while there is a certain part of customization, it's not that much. It's not that big.
Yeah, that's right. The clinical encounter is often far, not 90% the same the world over, isn't it? You see,
especially if you have a best practices solution. Yeah. We are seeing that in other countries, people are glad to adopt a few things that the NHS does well. We're seeing this in medication management.
My final question for today is you operate through partners internationally in order to scale. What do you look for as qualities in partners? What are the ingredients for success?
Yeah, it's funny because initially we thought, these big system integrators would be our target partners, and they are for implementation. But in order for us to sell, we cannot wait for them to do that. We need to create pull in the market. And once the pull is there, the partners come. So what we look for is definitely healthcare-specific knowledge, being in the space, because people underestimate how difficult this space is. And you have a lot of IT companies who think that healthcare is easy. We did so 15 years ago as well. We now know it's not. So healthcare expertise is key. And then, of course, being close to the customer, because we expect them to handle the customer relationship and, of course, make sure that the solution is adapted to the customer needs. And we want to stay a product company, so we don't do services unless it's absolutely necessary. We do some key accounts, like we did one London and a few others. But we have now 15, 16 partners across mostly Europe and Australia, obviously, New Zealand as well. And that's the business model.
Well, thank you very much for spending this time here with us today. I'll be following with great interest where the Better platform goes, and it seems to be really challenging the status quo and the current paradigm in a compelling way. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.